The lights in the back hallway were on. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled into the loading dock behind my restaurant that Thursday evening. I had come back to pick up a folder I'd left in my office, the guest list for Saturday's dinner, 30 years of names written in my own handwriting. And I saw the pale yellow glow seeping under the kitchen door. We'd been closed since 4. My kitchen manager was supposed to lock up at 5. I was halfway across the parking lot when Gus stepped out of the shadows by the dumpster enclosure. Gus has worked the building next door for 11 years. He services the HVAC units that run along the back of this whole block, mine included. A quiet man. Retirement age, maybe a few years past it. He always waves when he sees me, never says much more than afternoon or cold enough for you. So when he stepped toward me that evening with both hands raised slightly, palms out, like he was trying to stop traffic, I froze. "Mrs. Alderton," he said quiet, almost a whisper. "Don't go through the front. Go around back through the storage entrance and don't turn on any lights." I stared at him. "Gus, what on earth, please?" That one word, he said it like he meant it the way you mean please when something is actually wrong. I followed him, I don't know why exactly. 30 years of running this place on instinct maybe. Or something in his face. Gus has one of those faces that doesn't alarm easily. When it does, you pay attention. He led me around to the storage entrance, the one that opens into the dry goods pantry off the back of the prep kitchen. He handed me his flashlight, the small one he clips to his belt when he works in the ceiling crawl spaces. "Don't use your phone light," he said, "the screen glow, you're scaring me," I whispered. "Good," he said. "You should be scared." Let me back up, because this story doesn't make sense without the 30 years that came before it. My husband Clement and I opened this restaurant in 1995 with a business loan, a second mortgage on our house, and a menu that fit on one laminated page. We called it the Alderton Table, which my daughter told me was the most unimaginative name in the history of the restaurant industry, and she wasn't entirely wrong. But Clement said, "We're putting our name on it. That means something." He was right. It did mean something. It meant we couldn't walk away from it without walking away from ourselves. Clement passed 8 years ago. Heart attack, fast, no warning. One minute he was arguing with our linen supplier on the phone, and the next he was gone. For a year after that, I ran the restaurant from a kind of fog. My son handled the front of house. My daughter handled the books, and I stood in my kitchen for 16 hours a day because standing still anywhere else felt unbearable. The restaurant made it through, so did I, more or less. My son is 41 now. He's been working alongside me since he was old enough to carry a bus tray. He knows this place the way you know a house you grew up in. All the drafty corners, all the quirks, all the things that only work if you already know how to work them. I love him more than I can put into words. But I've always kept the finances in my own hands. The vendor contracts, the payroll accounts, the leases. Clement used to say I held the purse strings like they were a life preserver. He wasn't wrong about that either. My controller's name was Randall. He'd been with us for 14 years, impeccable references. Recommended by our accountant who'd known him since graduate school. Randall was methodical, efficient, and never once gave me a reason to question him. He wore the same style of khaki trousers in 7 different colors. He brought his own lunch in a bag with a blue stripe. He remembered every employee's birthday and left a card on their desk. That was Randall. I trusted him completely. Saturday was our 30th anniversary celebration. We had sent invitations to everyone who had ever mattered to the restaurant. The original investors, the regulars who'd been with us since the first year, the vendors and neighbors and city council members who had shown up at our ribbon cutting back when that block smelled like diesel fuel, and the sidewalk was cracked in 3 places. We had a live quartet. We had Clement's favorite bourbon. We had, for the first time in 30 years, a waiting list to get in. I had been looking forward to this night for a year, maybe longer. That was why I was in the parking lot on Thursday evening with a folder under my arm when Gus came out of the shadows and told me not to turn on the lights. The storage entrance opens into a narrow corridor that runs alongside the prep kitchen. There's a pass-through window, frosted glass, that looks into the main kitchen from about shoulder height. From the other side, it's opaque. From this side, if you get close enough, you can see light and movement if the kitchen is lit. The kitchen was lit. I pressed myself against the wall and looked through the gap at the edge of the window frame. The overhead lights were off, but the under-cabinet strips were on. The ones we use for closing cleanup, dim enough not to draw attention from the street. Randall was sitting at the prep counter with his laptop open. Across from him was a man I didn't recognize. Heavy-set, maybe 50, in a sport coat that didn't quite fit. He had a stack of folders on the counter beside him, and he was pushing papers across the surface toward Randall one at a time. I couldn't hear everything. The ventilation hums in that corridor. But I heard enough. I heard the partnership agreement. I heard before the anniversary event. I heard the number that came after, a figure that landed in my chest like something thrown hard against glass. I heard Randall say, calm as anything, she won't see it until the audit quarter, and by then the transition will be completed. She won't see it. I knew who she was. I stood in that corridor for what felt like a very long time. My flashlight was off. My phone was in my pocket. My heart was doing something I can only describe as trying to leave my body. Then I turned around and walked back out the storage entrance, and I sat in my car in the dark for 15 minutes without starting the engine. I want to tell you what betrayal feels like from the inside, because I don't think people talk about it honestly. It doesn't feel like anger right away. Anger comes later. What it feels like first is vertigo, this complete disorientation, like the floor you have been standing on for 14 years has just informed you that it is not a floor. It is a painting of a floor, and you have been standing on air this whole time and simply didn't know it. I had handed Randall access to things I had never given anyone else: my banking authorization, the employee payroll platform, the lease renewal documentation. I had given him these things the way you hand a trusted person your house keys when you're going away. Casually, without a second thought, because you are certain they will still be there when you get back. And now I was sitting in a dark parking lot in the November cold, and I understood that something had been happening in my house while I was away and I had not known. I called my daughter-in-law. I want to pause here because this part matters. My relationship with my daughter-in-law has not always been easy. She is a precise, careful woman, an attorney though she doesn't practice anymore, and when she first married my son I found her manner too formal, too measured. We were not the kind of family she came from, and I think she found us too loud, too sentimental, too quick to make decisions on feeling rather than fact. We had been kind to each other for years without being close, but when I sat in that car and thought about who I needed, I didn't think about my attorney. I didn't think about my accountant. I thought about her. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I had seen. I told her exactly what I had heard, word for word, because I had been repeating it in my head since I walked out of that corridor. She didn't interrupt me. She didn't say, "Are you sure?" or "Maybe there's an explanation." She said, "Where are you right now?" "The back lot. Drive to our house. Don't go back inside. I'll have coffee on." I drove to their house. She had a legal pad out by the time I walked through the door. My son was sitting at the kitchen table in his work clothes, still in his jacket, and the expression on his face when I came through the door, the worry there, already even before I said anything, nearly broke me open right there in the mudroom. I sat down and told them everything again slowly, and my daughter-in-law wrote as I talked. Dates, names, the exact phrasing I had heard through the frosted glass. When I finished, she read it back to me and asked me to confirm each piece. She did this without theatrics, just careful, methodical focus. "The phrase partnership agreement," she said. "Did he say whose name was on it?" "He said the new operating entity. He said before the event when the announcement creates the distraction." My son put his hands flat on the table. "He was going to use the anniversary," my son said, quietly, like he was working it out loud. "Use the attention, the press, the crowd. Do something in the middle of all that." "That's what it sounds like," my daughter-in-law said. She didn't look up from the legal pad. I said, "I need to know what's in the accounts." "Tonight, you can't access the system from outside the network after hours," my son said. "I know, but I have the paper records, the quarterly statements, the vendor files, the original lease documents. They're in the fireproof cabinet in my office." "Can you get to them without going through the main kitchen?" "The storage entrance, the same way I'd come in tonight." "Yes," I said. My daughter-in-law looked at me for a moment. "I'm coming with you," she said. It wasn't a question. We went back at midnight. She drove. We parked 2 blocks away and walked, which her idea and which turned out to be the right one, because Randall's car was still in the lot, parked differently now, tucked behind the catering company's vehicles, in a spot that wouldn't be visible from the street. The man in the sport coat was gone. We went in through the storage entrance. No flashlight this time. She had a small headlamp, the kind you use for reading in bed, and she wore it around her wrist and angled it down at the floor. The kitchen was empty. The laptop and the papers were gone. The under-cabinet strips were off. If I had come in the front that evening, none of this would have happened. I would have picked up my folder and gone home. We moved through the back corridor to my office. I pulled the fireproof cabinet keys from the bottom of my bag. I keep them in a side pocket I never use, and opened it. My daughter-in-law went through the files like she had been through them before. Methodical, no wasted motion. She photographed every page with her phone, holding it at an angle to avoid glare. I watched her and thought, I didn't know her. After 8 years of sitting across from her at holiday tables and family dinners, I had not known who she actually was. It took about 40 minutes. "Okay," she said at last. She sat back on her heels. "I see 3 things." I waited. The first is a lease amendment that was filed 6 weeks ago with a co-signatory clause. Do you remember signing a lease amendment? I did not. The second is a vendor transition agreement. This is a new preferred vendor signed in your name at terms that are about 30% above market rate. The savings are structured to be invisible in quarterly reporting. You'd see them in annual audit, but by then, the transition would be completed, Yes said. She looked at me. The third thing is the oldest. She held up a document, a shadow incorporation filing 6 years back. A holding company with a name that meant nothing to me, structured as a silent partner in our real estate entity. The entity that holds the property our restaurant sits on. 6 years. I closed my eyes for a moment. When I opened them, my daughter-in-law was looking at me steadily. This is real, she said. I want to make sure you know that before we go further. This is real and it is significant and you have options. But we have to move quickly. How quickly? I want this in front of an attorney, a different one than your current firm, someone Randall doesn't know, before the anniversary event. We have about 72 hours. 72 hours. I'll tell you something I have never said out loud until recently. In the weeks before the anniversary, I had been wrestling with a question I couldn't put down. My son was 41 years old. He had given more than a decade of his life to this restaurant. He came in 6 days a week. He managed a staff of 30. He handled vendor relationships I had passed to him one by one over the years, carefully, slowly, never quite all at once. And every time I thought about handing over the financial side, the operational control, the final word on the things that mattered, I found a reason to wait. He wasn't ready. The timing wasn't right. I needed to see one more quarter, one more year. I told myself it was wisdom, that I was protecting the legacy, that Clement would have done the same. But sitting in my office at midnight with my daughter-in-law spreading documents across the floor, I saw it differently. I had been so afraid of losing the restaurant that I had kept my son at a distance from it. I had trusted a man with a blue-striped lunch bag with things I wouldn't trust my own child. Because Randall didn't threaten the control I'd held for 30 years. My son did. I had been protecting the wrong thing. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life and also some of the most clarifying. My daughter-in-law had a law school colleague who specialized in financial fraud. She reached him by 9 the next morning. He reviewed the documents she had photographed, asked 12 very specific questions, and told us we had enough to move. We did not go to Randall. We did not tip our hand. We did, however, call one other person, our head server, who had been with us for 22 years and who I realized only in that moment had been leaving my office door slightly open on late nights for the past several months. I had thought she was just being considerate, keeping an ear out for me working late the way she always did. But when I asked her directly, the morning after we found the documents, whether she had seen anything unusual, she sat down across from me and said, I've been trying to figure out how to tell you something for 3 months. She had seen Randall in my office twice when I was not there. Once after closing, once on a Sunday morning when only she had come in to take a delivery. She had not said anything because she told herself she must have missed something, an explanation, a permission, a reason. She blamed herself for the hesitation. She was not to blame. I took her hand across the table and told her that, and meant it. Randall arrived Saturday afternoon to oversee setup as he had every year for 14 years. He looked exactly as he always looked, khakis, pressed button down, the small leather portfolio he carried to every event. He smiled at me when he saw me near the host's stand. Big night, he said. 30 years, I said, and I smiled back. The attorney arrived at 5:15 before the first guests. He had filed a motion that morning to freeze the operating accounts and place the real estate entity under examination. He had also been in contact with the Financial Crimes Unit of the District Attorney's Office, who sent 2 people in plain clothes, one of whom I initially mistook for a guest. Randall was at the bar talking to the man from the catering company, the man in the ill-fitting sport coat, who I now understood was the other party in the partnership agreement when they were approached at 6:47. I was standing near the kitchen pass when it happened. My son was beside me. I heard nothing dramatic. There were no raised voices, no scene. Just 2 men in plain clothes and a quiet conversation that ended with both Randall and the other man being escorted out Thurs's entrance, passing within 10 feet of where my daughter-in-law was standing by the bar with a glass of sparkling water. She caught my eye as they went past. She gave a single small nod. The guests didn't know. The quartet played. The speeches were made. My son said things about his father and about me that I will not try to repeat here because I would not be able to get through them without stopping. The bourbon was poured. The table was full. At the end of the night, after the last guest left and the staff was clearing down, I found my daughter-in-law in the back hallway near the storage entrance, the same hallway I had crept through 72 hours before with a borrowed headlamp and the worst fear I had felt in 8 years. She was reading something on her phone. She looked up when she heard me. "It's done for tonight," she said. "There's still a process, but yes, for tonight." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I thought about all the holiday dinners and all the family weekends where I had seen a careful, guarded woman and told myself I knew her. Where I had decided quietly without meaning to, that formal and measured meant closed off and distant. I had been looking at the surface of things for a long time. I had trusted the man who brought his lunch in a bag and left birthday cards on desks. I had been slow to trust the woman who showed up at midnight and photographed every page without being asked. "I owe you an apology," I said. "Not for tonight. For longer than tonight." She looked at me for a moment. Then she set her phone in her coat pocket and said, simply, "Tell me over breakfast. I want coffee, and I want you to tell my husband what you just told me. My son runs the restaurant now. Not in name, we're still working through the paperwork, the restructuring, the things that have to be untangled before they can be tied back together properly. But in practice, in the day-to-day reality of what it means to run a place where your name is on the door, it's his. I come in 4 days a week. I still do the menu changes for the seasonal rotation, because no one else remembers why we switched from the red wine braised short rib to the bone-in pork in winter, and that memory still lives only in me. I still have opinions about the table spacing. I still argue with the linen supplier, though now I put my son on the line when the argument gets circular, and it resolves faster than it ever did with me. Randall is awaiting trial. His attorney has asked for delays twice. I am told this is normal and that it will take time. I have made my peace with that. What I have not made peace with, what I don't think I'm supposed to make peace with, is the fact that I handed a stranger the keys to something I built over 30 years. And kept them from my son because I was afraid of what letting go would mean for me. That's not caution. That's not stewardship. That's a kind of selfishness that dressed itself up as love for so long I stopped being able to tell the difference. I keep the legacy. That part I got right. The not fraud, not injunction, not courtroom part, the part that matters, the part that came after, was the conversation at the breakfast table with my son and the woman he married. The one where I said everything I had been not saying for 8 years. That morning, Gus was standing at the service entrance when I arrived. He was checking something on the HVAC unit, the same as always. He nodded when he saw me. "Everything okay in there?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. He nodded again, satisfied. Then he went back to his work and I went back to mine.